So I'm Patty Hendricks. I'm a curriculum designer, and this is Josh Holt, online researcher, Aaron Ball, online researcher, and Matthew Mabey, bedside 201 natural disaster instructor. And we're going to talk a little bit about the TA research project that we're currently running. The first thing we want to do is talk to you a little bit about what we found in the literature. So in online learning, we know that instructor presence matters. Now, when we're talking about instructor presence, we're talking about the student's perception that someone's out there. And of course, this is going to include administration, management, and coordination. It's going to include communication between instructors to students. It's going to include participation in the online community or the online environment, including discussion boards and wikis and blogs or whatever the community is for that particular online course. And then it includes grading and feedback. So instructor presence is kind of a big, huge word to lump all that stuff in. We also know that feedback matters. John Hattie, educational researcher in Australia, did a great big mega study looking at all these educational interventions. And he looked at them to say, well, which ones matter? Feedback was number 10th out of 1,200. So feedback really matters. It gives us an effect size of 0.73, meaning it has a lot of bang for the buck. Feedback can also be positive or negative. Feedback is one of those educational interventions that don't always give a bang for the buck. They sometimes have a negative impact. Obviously, it depends on the type of feedback you get. And then we also know from the online learning research that response time matters. Timely feedback is more important than good feedback that comes very slowly. So, okay, so that's just specific to online learning. And then we thought, well, what does the educational research say about TAs? Well, it says that they have a negative or no impact on TAs. So we were like, negative or no impact on student learning. So we were like, so we started looking at the TA research. Most of it was done in the UK and the United States. Very long longitudinal studies, 12 years in one case, 7 years in another. So a very long look at how TAs are used in public education, mostly in high school. And in high school, the TAs are paraprofessionals, often assigned to work with special needs students. We didn't want to discount all of the findings, though, because there were some interesting things that we felt like were particularly relevant. Number one, when TAs and their teachers coordinate, the impact becomes more positive. Number two, the teachers are better at talking about content than the TAs are. Not a big surprise. The teachers have the subject matter, rich subject matter expertise. The TAs have small expertise. The TAs tend to close down academic discussions. The TAs tend to be task-oriented. Let's finish this, do this work, get this done. While the instructor might, or the teacher might ask, well, what are you thinking? Well, why do you think that? And help kind of increase the understanding. So those are very important points for us. Also, TAs tend to separate students from teachers, and we don't obviously want that separation. So important findings as we start this work. And then the last one we mentioned, because it was a similar study to an online course, they said, we know teacher presence matters. So if we modify teacher presence by having a TA in the course, and this TA sent out personal messages to the students 4 to 6 times through the semester, would that have any impact on learning, course activity, dropout rate? They found no impact on that. We like that study, but we kind of also discount it, because remember we said teacher presence was a whole mass of stuff. It wasn't just communication, and the only thing that they were manipulating was communication. So, okay, so that's just a quick look at the research that we, before we started.
Can I ask you a quick question? If I email you, can I get these slides?
Yes, okay. Absolutely. Okay, President Clark outlined 3 strategic imperatives for us. That we are to increase our quality of education, lower relative cost, and serve more students. And currently, in online courses at BYU-Idaho, what is currently going on? You might say, I hear of somebody having a TA. TAs are not approved in online courses except in very limited circumstances. So there are a few courses that are using them, very limited. Okay, so our objectives. How can a structured TA use in an online course help further the 3 strategic imperatives? And more specifically, we're interested in the effects on 4 dimensions. First, we're interested on the effects of students. We're interested in student satisfaction, student learning gains, and particularly their learning gains in relation to the feedback that they're receiving. We're interested in instructors. Are instructors satisfied? And then we're thinking about this time allocation. We don't want to add a TA in and then make that more time for the instructor, because now they have to coordinate with and manage this TA. And we also want to look at high value empowerment. Remember that one study that said that there was negative impact for TAs because the TAs separate the students from the teacher? So we were like, we want to have high value empowerment by adding a TA. Of course, we're looking at the course design. Does it increase the development time when we make this course more complex by adding a TA in? And do we have the resources to support that? And then the administration of the TA. How do we hire them? How do we manage them? How do we train them? How do we evaluate them? And how does that impact the class size?
My turn?
I think I go a little
You got one more?
I think I go a little bit.
Okay.
Do you want to go? Do you want to talk about this?
You're doing great.
Okay. I don't remember exactly how we planned this out, so if you want to take over, I'm happy for that.
I think you have some time at the end too.
Okay, so if you want to take over, let's do that.
Maybe before I move on to this, I was just going to give a flavor about how our team was organized around a project like this. We're very fortunate to have Patty on our team as a designer. She's got a lot of expertise in understanding how the curriculum is developed and where the instructor interacts with the curriculum, and so we're very fortunate to have her on our team. Erin and I are both in a group called Research and Development in the Course Improvement team. We have what I think is a great job, a fun job doing research, and we don't hear a lot about research happening at BYU-Idaho, but there are pockets of research happening on campus and online. We have some research happening, and so and we're grateful to have Matthew and the other instructors involved in this project. So it's a cross functional team here that involves design teams, some research, and put together a study. You'll see it's a little bit more academic maybe than we're used to talking about at BYU-Idaho, but hopefully it's something that will help us learn some important things as we reach out and look at online learning as a new field. It's relatively young in comparison to other educational ventures. So the design approach mimics that a little bit. We've got a control group, and then we have 2 experimental groups. One of the reasons why we selected the natural disasters course was that it had enough sections being taught online that we could divide it into enough of these control and experimental groups. So we have each of the experimental groups has 2 sections in them, and then the control group has 2 sections in them.
I think we have more than 2 sections.
I think that it has grown actually, maybe 3 or 4.
Yeah, exactly.
Because the enrollments right at the end kind of boosted up there. But each of the sections has a 50 student enrollment cap in them with 1 instructor and no TA. So that's sort of the standard setup for our class, the FD Sci 201 class. So the experimental group number 1, there's 2 sections, 50 students, so the cap is the same on the student. We've added the essential ingredient here is the TA is additional time. And you'll see the goals that we're trying to reach with this experimental group on the next slide. Experimental group number 2 has 2 sections, but each of the caps has been raised to 70, and then the same amount of TA time. So you can see the difference here. We have different goals that we're trying to evaluate on this first experimental group than we do with this other one, and you can see the enrollment differences. Susan?
What's the credits for the course?
It's a 3-credit course.
3 credit. I'm curious why the 9 hours a week for the instructor instead of the 12. I guess it's 9 to 12 range, and you're shooting for the minimum of that.
So in design, we can work with 9 hours for instructor. For students, we can go 9 to 12, but for instructors, we're designing at 9.
Okay.
8 to 9.
Okay. Thank you.
And are those instructors for each of these different groups and the TAs all different?
Okay, so in experimental group 1, Matthew teaches both of those sections, and he works with 1 TA who is working 20 hours a week. But
For both sections.
So 10 hours for each section,
Yeah,
right? Does that make sense? Here in experimental group 2, we have 2 separate instructors, each teaching 1 section, and then there's also 2 separate TAs one of them working with each instructor. Okay.
What is the
Sorry, so
constraint?
again, in group 1, it's the same TA working 20 hours, and in group 2, it's 2 different TAs, each working 10?
That's correct.
Okay.
One of the constraints here is also just the willingness of instructors to participate and to do, I mean, ideally, you might have wanted to have somebody doing 2 sections of the experiment, but just the limitations are their availability.
Right, yeah. So that's great constraint. Yeah, some of the other constraints are, for this research project, we were asked, and this is partly by design, to see if we could not have significant curriculum changes. So we're adding a TA, and there's roles that a TA is going to play there. But let's see if we could extract the design of that process away from the curriculum changes there. This also has an impact for us to be able to maybe use some courses that have already been designed and add TAs to them post-design. So the TAs currently have to be on campus to clock hours, so they can work from off campus, but they have to come each pay period onto campus to be able to time clock in. That was a constraint on hiring TAs that necessitated in us hiring TAs that took the class in an on-campus setting, but they're now TAing a class that's an online class, and there's some nuances there that have been we've kind of worked through a little bit there. And then just another thought that would be nice, but this is kind of just a current situation, is that we would have liked to have registration sort of be randomized. So the students, we have maybe 400 students, they all register for the class, and then we just randomly distribute them across sections. Students right now sign up for a section, and we just kind of get what we get. And I think that's normal or standard, so I don't know that we're, it's inhibiting the study, but it's just something to recognize there. Okay, so our goals, the control group is just to establish a baseline. Experimental group 1, you'll remember the cap is the same, but we've added a TA. So a lot of our goals are to increase the presence of the instructor because of the TA, to be more proactive in tutoring, and using the extra time to be proactive there, to increase the interactions with students, to supply maybe some just-in-time mentoring, being more aware of what's happening, to interject when necessary, and then to increase the amount and quality of feedback. So a lot of this, since the enrollments haven't changed necessarily, the idea here was to try to see if we could increase and provide more. The experimental group 2, since the cap is increased, we're using the TAs to maybe augment the increase in load, right? So maintain the presence, meet the needs of the communication, and provide timely and adequate feedback. So different goals, different designs, and we're just kind of interested to see what comes of that. Any questions on maybe difference there? Okay. All right, this is a demonstration on how we divided the roles or the activities between a TA and instructor. So the TA is the blue color, the instructor is the green, and there's different parts here. This is kind of a list in Brain Honey or in iLearn of the activities. Here's a grade book piece. It's you don't see this all on one screen usually, but this is in the grade book. You can kind of see the activities that each role is grading, right? And then here's just a list for week 4, week 5, and week 6 across longitudinally, some of the activities that before, most of these or all of these were being done by an instructor because there wasn't a TA. So we've kind of divided them out a little bit. I don't know if you're as interested necessarily in what specifics are happening, just that we kind of have divided it out and given different activities to different roles. And we worked closely, and this is something we're adjusting on the fly, maybe thinking about is, did we do the right mapping here? Are the instructors touching the right activities to give feedback to students? Are the TAs touching the right activities? And I think since this is our first time, we're learning some things there, and we'll see where that goes.
So like, for example, on your gradebook lesson 4, the group discussion board, you have the TA is the one that graded it, but did the instructor post to the discussion board, or was that kind of like just a TA activity, that it was the TA's job to kind of have the whole activity?
Yeah, the TA is in charge of it. I watch it and I kind of weigh in as needed.
Okay, so there could have been a mix. There may be a discussion board where you weren't weighing in and then some where you may
Right,
have.
so
Okay.
like if somebody raised a really good question that needed expertise,
Additional, yeah.
I'd weigh in on that if I spotted it, or if there was something current event wise, that kind of thing.
Nikki,
Is there sort of a general philosophy that the TA grades kind of a low level and
Yeah.
instructor grades more important, or?
I think that's how we try to perceive it. We call that more high value or high touch point with the student. And we got feedback from the instructors who've been teaching the class. Matthew was very involved in that. As we were mapping this out, we asked them which ones would you maybe not prefer, but which ones do you feel like would be most beneficial as an instructor to stay connected to, and which ones. And it's hard, you know, as we were working with, it's hard for them to detach themselves or hand it off, especially where it's a brand new thing and they don't know the TAs yet. So that was kind of gut wrenching a little bit, but and that's why I said we're kind of looking at that and evaluating that. Maybe something that you adjust as you go. But keep me on time here because I know we're okay. Jim.
Just curious about, have you ever thought about like a hybrid, like I was thinking, where they would both be able to do a discussion group where, or an assignment where a TA might go through and get the schematics and the grammatical and stuff, and then the professor could come in and give technical feedback, or like even on a discussion board that they would be able to check, okay, they did it all, and give them the basic rubric grade if they posted on time. They did 4 posts by this date, and then the professor could come in if they wanted and say, hey, here, your content's right on, or you missed the boat with this one. Not that you would say that.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of possibilities here, and so I think that what we tried to do with this project was kind of map it to what made sense in the curriculum. And so I think we could, you know, do a new improvement project or kind of adjust things, but we structured it in a way this way to try to make some very clear distinctions, at least for this study, just so that we could see, map a little bit closer that some of the value adds that the TA is doing, and maybe have some tighter evaluation of their role. But I think that, you know, course designs vary widely and types of activities vary widely, and so some courses may lend themselves to different ways that a TA would be involved, and we're not saying that we necessarily got it perfect or right this first run, but so I think that there's a lot of options and possibility to explore there. Yeah.
The other kind of question I have is kind of like I think of the high school model, where you have a student that's taken your class in high school, say, and was an outstanding student, and then they can come back for like a partial credit, like a 1 credit thing to be a TA. Have you ever thought about that model where you have a student that has taken the class, done exceptional, and the instructor could identify them as an exceptional student, and they could come back and maybe, instead of a hiring, but as a credit course of like a 1 credit, maybe TA along. Instead of, you know, for cost too, because you wouldn't have to, in theory, pay, you would be on a credit in the field or something.
We'll take a note of that. It's a great idea to consider. I don't know if that's something we've discussed. So. But the next slide is very similar. This is the experimental group 2. So the first one was group 1. You'll see some of these. It's the same, but some are crossed out because the TAs were essentially helping with some more of the load here, and so we have more students, so more needs to be done per minute or per hour or whatever that we have because we have more students. So we had to adjust things and kind of move things around based on who was doing what. A little bit different in the experimental groups, but pretty close.
So in experiment 2 and the control group, there are less total things going on, period. Is that right?
So in the experimental,
you have 10 hours or 9 hours versus 19.
Right.
So overall in the course, there's like half as much total stuff going on. Is that?
no.
No, all the activities are the same requirements for students.
We just have more students.
No, but I mean on the instructor side.
Right. We have more students to grade.
On the experimental group 2.
On experimental group 2, we have.
But in group 1,
there's so that in experimental group 1, we're adding more instructor presence in the group presentation.
we're spending more time on all that stuff.
Right.
Okay.
Right, and more TAs are doing some open labs and some things that we don't have time.
That don't exist in the other ones.
Yeah, there's
Right.
additional.
That's what I was
There are
there's
some extras,
additional.
true, but the requirements as far as grade book and things,
Right,
they're all
right.
the same, but there are some additional.
Right, so there's additional help, additional tutorials, additional mentoring going on in experimental learning. Right.
Matthew will be able to talk a little bit more about that a little later on. Okay. So hopefully that will help answer your question, and if not, let us know.
Just talking about resources and tools.
Patty.
Is that Patty?
Yeah. Okay,
I'll switch
let's
back.
switch back. Okay, so available to all, the guided lab essay is, we created some rubrics so that okay, first of all, let me back up. So we asked the instructors, what do you want to keep control of, what do you want to keep having be your responsibility, what can we give to the TAs? And we decided that the guided lab essay questions could be graded by the TAs. In order to do that, we created rubrics so that the TAs could actually grade. They don't have the scientific knowledge, and so they need these rubrics to help them. And we adapted the rubrics to give feedback so that all the sections now have feedback on the guided lab essay questions, and those that are in the TA1 and or experimental 1 and experimental 2 have rubrics. We have a TA training and certification course that we are trying out, and we have structured lesson notes for the instructor and TA. And then we have open labs in experimental 1 and 2, and open labs didn't look so great, but we'll talk about that a little bit more. That was the original design, was that the TAs would provide open labs. Go ahead. All right, so here's the lesson notes, and you can see here's lesson 4. These are what the control groups saw. This is what was in the class. And then here's the lesson notes for experimental group 1, and here's the lesson notes for experimental group 2. And so you can see a clear division between the instructor role and the TA role, and the instructor role and the TA role in each iteration of the class, before the class starts, during the class, and grading and feedback. And these are the rubrics. These are the rubrics that this is the essay question, this is the student's answer, and this is how the TA went in and scored that based on the scientific explanation. And the thing that is really powerful about these rubrics is it helps the students understand where their answer should be. It helps them understand the components of a complete answer, and it gives them accurate scientific information. And this is what the students in the control group will see. They get feedback on their essay question that just comes in kind of a paragraph form. And this is what the students hear. So you can see that the feedback is interesting and useful if they
On the left, though, is that standard feedback, or is that feedback for each unique to each student?
It's standard feedback.
It is.
Comes to every student as soon as they submit. And you can see
That
that
paragraph does.
in this particular case, I submitted nothing, and I still got my feedback.
Gotcha.
This
Okay.
is the control group, right?
Okay.
Now, the instructor would go in and score this.
Right.
So-
The feedback though is the same for each student.
The feedback is the same for every
Gotcha.
student. It's
Whereas
an automatic feedback.
Over there, it's different.
Well, I mean, it's
Potentially, because
scored.
they're-
It's
The
scored
breakdown of the
differently.
score
This rubric comes in for every single student.
Okay.
The score comes in based on how the TA scores it.
Okay, I misunderstood. So those aren't comments of the TA.
No, those aren't comments. This is a
That's your
The
rubric.
professor helped you create that beforehand.
Gotcha.
One of our online instructors, one of our online instructors created these rubrics, a specific rubric for each essay question.
Gotcha.
Now I'm kind of confused because we use the rubrics and stuff too. What would be the benefit of the feedback if they're already seeing the rubric? If I'm
Okay.
seeing the rubric and saying, oh, this is what I'm graded on, this is what I need, and this is how I'm graded, what's the benefit of the feedback? on
Okay,
that?
so the control group, they see this.
After they submit, they don't see it
This is
before.
both these are after they submit.
After the student submits, the control group gets this.
Oh, so they don't,
The
the
TA sections get
Right.
this.
And they don't see the rubric beforehand.
students don't
Right.
see the rubric beforehand?
No.
No,
They get it after
Oh.
the fact.
they get it after
I
they.
Otherwise,
see
you
it
have a
before.
perfectly constructed
What's that?
essay question.
I think ours see the.
Right,
the
so your
rubric-
rubric is on your overall assignment, and it's available as a rubric button. The
Yeah,
students can
when the
click on.
students
This
click
is a
on.
rubric for this particular essay question, and it's built into the question. So it's unique to this question.
And this
not
looks like it's even giving an
Okay.
example, is that right? Is this like,
Right.
here's what a good answer looks like, kind of?
Right, so these are the components of a good answer, and then this is the description of why that answer is accurate.
How much more time to create the course does it take when you have to put in that TA rubric?
So we contracted the online instructor for 40 hours.
And how many questions?
We had about approximately 2 to 4 essay questions per lesson.
So it's about 20 to 25, so.
It's a high value. Yeah.
Yeah.
No doubt about that. It's high value.
So could you do something like that for your discussion board too, for the TA, so the TA would go, oh, this is kind of what I should be looking
Yes.
for in my discussion board?
Sure. Rubrics,
Stuff.
rubrics could be put on any islands.
Yeah, the Brain Honey tool, it would work a little bit differently in how it was implemented, but you could still use a rubric approach for the discussion.
Okay, this is the TA training and certification course. It's an island course, and it talks about what the TA's roles and responsibilities are. And the TA goes through it. We had the TAs go through it before the semester started. So in order to meet our hiring needs, we had to have our TAs actually come to Idaho in order to take the certification course. That was one of our requirements for hiring. So we had a TA in California. She actually had to come back. She had to return to campus early in order to take the certification course.
Do they get paid for?
They got paid. Everything we asked them to do, they got paid for.
And does David Ashby, is he the one that created
Yeah.
this?
Correct.
That's right.
That's correct.
So this is a generic TA course.
This is a generic course for TAs online.
Online.
It's mostly based on how to grade.
Gotcha. Yeah,
It has a little bit, you're seeing here, a little bit of effective questioning, but mostly it's, how to set up discussion board groups, how to, how to.
you know how we can log in as instructors to see any course? Is this available to us as we log in?
Probably not.
You'd have
But
to ask.
we could probably arrange for that. And this doesn't take a lot of time of the TAs, maybe 2 to 4 hours, I'm not sure,
Correct.
kind of in
That's
that,
correct.
that ballpark. But they're not experienced in seeing the gradebook side of things.
No, exactly, that's what
So
I'm interested.
that's kind of the idea here.
Yeah.
In the context of yesterday's discussion, I'll bet that some of the things said in here were some of those early problems we had on, say, the weekly report, that they were trying to follow some of the tips in here and just getting a little overzealous.
Yes, I think that's exactly right. So we need to have the instructors go through this so they understand. Good way. Excellent. That coordination issue. Okay. Okay, just a little bit on hiring process. Jen Parkinson handled our logistics. We were able to hire from the pool of people who submitted applications. We weren't able to go out and find upperclassmen in geology with a geology major, right? We had to choose the best of the batch that applied. So we got sophomores, maybe not the best. Sophomores who had gotten an A or a B. In one case, we took a B+ in that side 201 course.
Okay.
Little, maybe not the best.
Is there a reason why you had to do it that way, or just first kind
Kind of our timeline, we just didn't have a lot of extra time.
It wouldn't have to be the model.
Right.
No, that doesn't have to be.
Patty doesn't sleep, by the way, just like.
And he does this. He answers emails at 4 a.m. We also had an instructor meeting where we had all the instructors come virtually to a pilot kickoff meeting. And then we had a TA meeting, and we had a TA meeting where we sat down and we used the rubrics and we graded actual student work, and we had them talk out loud through their grading protocols so that they could norm to each other. We certainly weren't trying to make them robots, but we were trying to help them understand how the other TAs were grading. And they really liked that meeting, and they asked for it earlier in the semester. We had it at about week 3 or 4 after they'd actually had some grading practice, and they said, oh, we would have liked to have this earlier. Okay, so.
Do you want to run the machine?
I'll sit down here.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and just share some of the approach about how we're evaluating the study, the effectiveness of what's happening, right? So if you think back to earlier on, we mentioned some of the goals. The key goals are to try to serve more students, or reduce relative cost, or increase quality, or some combination of those 3 in each of the experimental groups that we have. More specifically, Patty mentioned we're trying to do that through increasing student learning, or also, and hopefully that comes through empowering our instructors to have additional time to spend on kind of high value adding tasks and activities. So this is just providing a snapshot of some of the data that we're using and the approaches to kind of evaluate the change in some of these areas. So from students and instructors, you can see some of these, and then the next slides, I'm just going to provide some more detailed examples of those 3 that have the asterisks on them. So one way that we're measuring the impact on student learning is through the use of what we're calling learning surveys. So we took the learning objectives that are used in the course, put them into kind of a survey format, and in a pre-post approach, we asked the students at the beginning and the end of the class to evaluate themselves on their confidence to, perform that skill or ability, right? And I think the number of learning objectives that we had ended up being around 55-ish. So that's about how many questions the students went through and rated themselves on. And then each of those learning objectives was tied to one of the 5 outcomes of the course. So these are the actual outcomes listed here. And then this is just for the pre. So we have the pre data right now. We don't have post data, we have pre data. But we rolled up that data into each individual outcome. And then you can see on a 10-point scale, this is how students self-evaluated their pre-knowledge on those 55 items, kind of rolled up and aggregated together into each course outcome. So mostly, pretty low, which is probably good, because that means they're not coming into the class with a lot of pre-knowledge. So there's not a lot of overlap in some other courses that they've taken. And what we hope to see then at the end is high values, right, on this. Go ahead.
How do you get your students to take the surveys? Is it like required, like in Brain Honey you can release it? Is it that it won't release the first thing?
It was, we didn't do that. We actually did attach a point value, as a nominal point value, and a due date attached to it, both at the beginning and the end. It's built into the course, so they see it as an activity. And it's pretty quick, the way that the survey works. They just go through and read the questions. They're not, necessarily asked to answer everything. It's just kind of, on a 3-point scale, where do you think that you are? So I think the time spent on that was about 10 minutes for each student on average spent about 10 minutes. So this data, so we split it out by each group. So this is kind of the control group, the TA 50 student section, the TA 70 student section. And then we also were interested, we know that there's pathway students that take this course, and we also wanted to just kind of separate that out and see if there's any differences that kind of come from that. And so this is kind of the overall for the control groups, and then this is that broken out by either if they're a pathway student or any other student. So it might be a student, a day student, they might still be an online student, but they didn't come through pathway, non-matriculating student. There's other kind of student types there.
Some really confident pathway students in the
Yeah.
70, 17 years, right?
So what we hope to see is we'll look at the gains, the gains in learning over the semester. So kind of the end minus the beginning, and then we'll also look at just the actual achievement of the students' perception of achievement of those learning objectives. So the actual numbers, not necessarily the change in, but just what the actual numbers look like. And we're hoping that we can control a little bit for differences in, just the student body in each of the groups. They may not be kind of similar, perfectly similar, just based on how the registration happens. So we're hoping that this can help us to control for a little bit of that as well. So this is one thing. We're asking for student feedback at different times in the course. This is an example of mid-course. So just a little bit before halfway through the course, students provide feedback in all courses, all online courses, for their instructor. Formative feedback to help the instructors, to kind of see how things are going from the student perspective. We added in for the TAs a very similar survey question or set of questions where that would be formative for the TAs, so that the TAs could receive feedback from the students to understand from the student's perspective how they are perceiving this TA at being in these areas. So some quantitative and some qualitative. Quantitative on items that are, I think, the same for the instructor. Their responsiveness to grading and the other things that you see listed there. and that if there's just any open-ended feedback that they wanted to provide, then they had that opportunity. It's formative for the TA. We're using it also to understand just from the student's perspective, a little bit more of what's the feel from their perspective of how things are working with the TA in the class. And then we'll have an end of course survey that we'll have the students complete as well. And then the last one that I think we were going to just spend some time on here was we're asking for feedback from the TAs and the instructors involved in the TA sections, the sections that use TAs, to provide some weekly feedback to us on that experience. So this is not the students in the class, this is the TAs and the instructors. So the instructors were really interested in understanding, on the time side, did we get it right? Or is it fit pretty well to what we were hoping for in terms of the hours that we were trying to kind of get things to fit in? How are things working out with your TA? Are you being able to meet with them? Those types of things. The survey is mostly the same for both the instructors and the TA. There are a few differences. We're asking the instructor some items along the lines of their satisfaction, how satisfied they are in teaching the course kind of in this format. And then also some comments just about the TA, if they have any concerns or good things, especially good things to say, then want to be sure that we can collect that as we go through. So these aren't the only ones that we're using, but just for time's sake, we wanted to highlight some of those as well. So lessons learned, we have some early lessons learned, right? So that's kind of what we're highlighting here. First, we do know that there is a learning curve. So both for the instructors and the students, because we took kind of this previous course and then it became a little bit new because there's a different role that the instructor is now playing, and then the TA is kind of learning their role too. All the TAs had taken this course before, but the online and the campus versions were different. So subject matter wise, pretty good, but actual activities and kind of maybe how they worked, they had to learn those things. So there has been an initial learning curve both for the instructors and the TAs, both in terms of the content as well as building kind of that relationship, the instructors with the TAs and vice versa.
But you just did the way you hired your TAs was the necessity of time. This is how we do it, and I imagine you probably do something similar. Well, I don't know actually, but our on-campus professor chooses the TA whose students that he or she has worked with, so they already have that relationship. They're very familiar, so So I don't know if that's something that you're looking for. If you go do this in some classes, that you would already jump that hurdle because the professor would be able to choose, the on-campus professor would be able to choose. But then I guess you don't have that because you're the online TA.
Yeah, our on-campus professors don't teach our online classes, and we weren't allowed to hire someone that didn't live in Idaho, so we couldn't hire just an online student.
Right.
We have to.
Right.
Yeah.
That may change in the future, but
One
that's
possibility would be to have the campus TA also TA an online course, right? So that they actually do.
Right, and the campus, in this particular case, in this particular course, the campus course is quite a bit different than online course.
Well, so on that point though, this was a while ago, I taught anatomy, 2011 online. I had a student who did exceptionally well, and they asked me next semester, who do you recommend for a TA for you? And I recommended her. And so I don't know what her situation was, but I think it's a possibility, but I think you have to meet all these other requirements.
Right.
Yeah.
If you're living in Idaho would be a big
But she must have been here because she was my TA the next semester and did an awesome job.
So are BYU's online TAs mostly undergraduates?
Yes.
and these are all great comments.
Yes.
One of the things that we are also thinking about in the back of our minds is kind of, you think back to the beginning, what we said is that we're looking at both a scaled and a structured approach to TAs that could be supported, especially in larger enrollment courses. So if it's a course like this that was going to operate but had 50 sections, then we need to have the equivalent of 50 TAs, right? Or 25, working 20 hours a week, something like that. And that might be, so that's something we're also thinking about in the back of our minds to make sure that that's can scale.
I just wonder about a much smaller, it's like on campus, I teach 12 credits, and my TA puts in maybe 5 hours a week for 12 credits, right? So is there a model where the TA, you have 50 sections and you have 10 TAs
Sure.
that manage?
Yeah, and it could be, and it all kind of depends on how the TA is designed into the course, the time that's going to be needed per section. We went, so we went about 10 hours TA time per section per week in each case, but each case was very different, right? So, but there's other ways that you could split that up, right? So you could split it up to where it's maybe, just 2 hours of TA time in a individual section per week, and those are other options that could be considered, certainly. We also a TA standards document. So there's instructor standards that all of our online instructors are obviously very familiar with. We realized that the TAs weren't aware of that, of kind of the standards that instructors have. And so we're developing that, so that a kind of a TA version of that we can provide for the TA so that they're aware. That also is connected into kind of the bottom bullet here about the TGL needing to be aware of the TA's involvement in the course. So if there's certain items that are maybe being graded later or other things that's kind of visible to the teaching group leader, so that they kind of understand that. And so there's issues with that we're kind of having to figure out how do we structure that, and how could that work in a scaled way. And then the last one, we did talk about the grading and normalizing meeting that we had, and how the feedback was that should be earlier in the semester. And it would be helpful to involve more of the instructors, either kind of beforehand in kind of the development of the expectations on certain assignments, or if they wanted to be involved directly in the meeting, that it was more of a, not necessarily a requirement, but strongly encouraged, as opposed to just making it available and inviting them to attend if they were able to do that.
So we have about 7 or 8 minutes left. We're going to have Matthew just kind of share some of his experience, and then we'll just kind of wrap up with any questions or answers or whatever you want to ask.
I'll try and be brief so that you have time for questions. So one of the things that jumped out of President Gilbert's talk.
To Clark.
The Clark that was messing with me. Was the change, and it's remarkable. Well, first of all, it was remarkable when they asked me, the history of the class, to think that I've been doing this for 5 years now, over 5 years. So, but to make the adjustment to doing it a little differently is really hard, and but it's I think it's going pretty well. I'm really glad they're doing this for 2 semesters, because I think this first semester is a learning process, and I think the second semester will be much better representation of what can be accomplished. But I find it interesting, the stuff you have with BYU, because I taught down there. I did an online version of Physical Science 100, and we didn't get to choose our TAs for that. For the classes in geology department, we did. But Physical Science 100, it was more like what's happened here, where you get somebody that applied for a job and had gotten a minimum grade.
So it's different. I mean, it's independent study and BYU Online, totally different.
Yeah.
Places.
So it's how you break it up and farm it out is going to be very much course specific. And we had the curriculum and the structure that was laid out already, and we had to kind of just only tweak that to make this work. And so consequently, if you were to design it around a TA, you would design it very differently. I think they recognize that. But for tweaking an existing course, you and not have it be out of whole cloth kind of thing, it limits what you can do. What I'm doing is there's a presentation assignment that every 2 weeks that they do. And my involvement on that is to jump in and be much more involved in telling them about that disaster that they're doing the case study on and helping them get all the facts right and so forth. And what I've discovered is you can't just kind of do that halfway, and balancing that out and the timing of that is really proving to be a challenge. I'm still trying to get it worked out, even though we're halfway through the semester, because to do it really right is going to be a lot more hours than there are. And so, I'm trying to be honest to the point of the thing, but also not, neglect the students. So I'm looking forward to that second semester to get it right. In terms of your grading thing, spelling and grammar and so forth, if there's glaring problems, the other instructors and I will make an offhand comment about it, but we're not going to go through and redline everything. We're grading on the substance of it, not the form. And so that the TAs, if we had them take that over, it might be a very useful thing if they had that skill, but that's not something that for the baseline course we're involved with TAs, is that the original form of this, and this will be the last thing I say in alternatives, the original form of this, the guided labs we talked about, were these worksheets that they would do, and the original course design was that they were all free-form answers that had to be graded by hand. That's what my pilot experience at BYU-Idaho Online Learning was. I quickly negotiated with the course designer that this was not workable. It was, a 40-hour-a-week kind of structure that they developed with the way it worked, because it's not as fast working online as if you've got papers in front of you, because it has to load and all that kind of stuff. And so what we do is they fill out the worksheet on the honor system, then they go to an answer submit. There's a variety of multiple choice questions for those things in the worksheet that are amenable to that, that they fill out, and then there's a couple of essay, 2, 3, I think, there might be 4, I don't remember there one being with 4, that are the free form that need to be graded by hand. And we preserve that. Actually, we've got some great instructors that it really goes beyond the 10 hours a week that they're being paid for to do it in the current structure. And it's just because it is intensive grading. And so by bringing the TAs in and getting them involved in that, part of that 10 hours is actually paying back the instructor for something that's just built into the structure that we haven't perfected yet. The rubrics will really help on that, so that you've essentially gotten the baseline course instructors probably back to a legitimate 10 hours a week.
Yeah.
I can ask a question. How much transparency is there about the TA? Like, first, do the students know there's a TA, and then do they know? If so, do they know which assignments they're grading? Like, how much do they kind of see the TA?
Yeah. So we in the course view of each course, we created a place just after the instructor profile that the TA would create a profile to be very visible to the students in the course. We left it up to each instructor to identify how they wanted to communicate with the students, how they would be working with their TA, because they would be the ones that would be handling any questions about grading and so forth. So we wanted them to just decide what they were going to do. So that was left up to the instructors. We did find something, though, interesting, that a minority of students, but larger than we would have anticipated, I think it's like 10% or so of students in the mid-course feedback indicated that they didn't even know that they had a TA.
So we asked them to evaluate the TA, and they're like, what?
Yeah, so that was surprising to us. 1 in 10.
Yeah, some of them don't know they have an instructor.
I know. Did you get them to read the syllabus? That's amazing.
Yeah. So.
We have a syllabus quiz, so they do read the syllabus.
So that was actually one question that one idea that we did talk about is, well, maybe in the future we put a question on the syllabus quiz, what's the name of your TA?
Yeah.
Or something like that. And,
So this is a 2-semester project, and then what are your plans for reporting results? And
well, assuming the project ends, then we'll either roll it back to control group where it was before, or our plan to do an evaluation at the end of the semester once we have pre and post data, kick off the next semester and just sort of see about mid-course where things are at. And at that point, we'll have to decide, are we essentially funding the TAs for this class beyond the the project that we have allocated, or we haven't. So I don't know that we've determined that, at least right now. We're hopeful that we can show some evidence of here's maybe a process or a structure that works for sustaining a TA system, whether it's for this class or for other classes, or we want to make some adjustments for other things. But that was kind of the intent here, is let's do something structured, intentional about TA, so that we can build a system that will facilitate it one way or another.
I guess what I mean is, is there a plan for you to report on your study, kind of show us publicly the data and that sort of thing? Is that?
There will be.
I mean, you've whetted my appetite, and now you can't prevent me from eating the rest of it.
We will.
We'll show you the
There will be a
picture of the
report.
food.
There will be a report that we created. I don't know if we'll have a formal presentation like this that we would report on, but those we make those available. I'm not sure what channel those would come out. We could probably
do it in the community somehow.
Yeah, I think it'd be really interesting for others to hear. I want to kind of know the end results. So, thank you.
Yeah.
When instructors on campus, instructors have TAs, is there any sort of study or evaluation or assessment that on the campus instructors use TAs?
Not that I'm aware of. We would have liked to have seen that, even something just anecdotally, but I don't know that there has been anything that's
In
happened.
the range of how to experience on campus.
Yeah, one thing that we
exactly.
recognize is even online, there could be a range of ways that TAs could be used. You know, they could be used more like a grading function, or like an open lab, function serving all sections of the course, right? When we say structured, we did really want to be purposeful in designing a role for the TA into the course, so that it wasn't just you're an instructor, you're teaching this course. Oh, by the way, you also have a TA. Now go figure out how you're going to use them, right? We wanted it to be more structured, and okay, this is kind of how the course has been designed, with the mind that there would be a TA involved as well. You still have the flexibility to kind of figure out how things are going to work for you and how you manage it, but we hope that you kind of follow this design to the extent that you can, right? So that's with campus. For most courses, it will be very different, just depending on how each individual instructor is handling their curriculum.
One final thing I'd like to say is there is an open lab in the table of contents for the TA to talk about something that relates to that week. My TA has had 6 students show up for that, most of them only once in the 5 or 6 weeks when I asked her the question about it. The students are not taking advantage of it, which is no shock to me because I have to force them to read the notes from the instructor.
Yeah.
If there's not points, then they don't write it, and that's proven true on this.
We don't want to make you late for other discussions of these happening, but thank you for coming.
Thank you.